are slightly different from what they are. We talk, we see things are normal.
Welcome to Strange Familiars. How are you doing tonight, Alice?
I'm fine.
Well, as promised, we have guest hosts tonight. Jon and Sam from Riverbend Comics have done us a good favor and stepped in. They're going to take the reins of Strange Familiars for us tonight. They're going to talk about some comics with paranormal themes. I think we're going to do this again with them at some point because there's some comics that I wanted to talk about with them, but I'm glad to have them kind of take this episode and take the theme. We'll have a link in the show notes that'll take you to a special section on riverbendcomics.com. They kind of have a high strangeness section. It'll have all the titles they talk about on the show, and then I think they have my books in there as well. So you can pick up stuff from Riverbend Comics. And I'm happy if you get my books from them or from us or wherever you get them. I'm happy. Before we turn the show over to Jon and Sam, though, I want to take a moment and mention our wonderful sponsors, 90 Days to the Perfect Puppy. If you have a puppy and you need help with your puppy, if it's mouthing and biting, or if you're having trouble potty training, leash training, crate training, if your puppy's barking too much or has hyperactivity issues, whatever problems you have, 90 Days to the Perfect Puppy can help you. They have a relationship-based approach to training. They help you and your puppy become perfect for each other. You can find them at sithappens.us. Look for the 90 Days to the Perfect Puppy link at the top of the page. Check them out. They have online sources, video lessons. They have a secret Facebook group where you can interact with other puppy owners who might be having the same issues you are and might be able to offer some creative help for your puppy problems. And of course, one-on-one options are available as well. Again, you can find them at sithappens.us. Look for the 90 Days to the Perfect Puppy link at the top of the page. So now, let's turn the show over to Jon and Sam for some paranormal comic talk.
Hello, everyone. Is that too loud?
It was pretty loud.
All right, sorry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strange Familiars. And this is an episode that may seem a little less strange and also less familiar. But we're filling in here today for Tim, and happy to be here. My name is Jon.
And I'm Sam, and it's actually strange and familiar because we're strange hosts, but you're familiar because you've been on the podcast before as a contributor.
Yeah, some of you guys may remember me. But Tim and I go way back, and so I do kind of pop in now and then, and I do have some ties to the supernatural, as well as the business that we run called Riverbend Comics. And we were really excited to be on one of the recent episodes talking about the shadow. And we're back today. And our goal today is really to kind of run through and talk about some books that we've got in our collection here that we think might be interesting to the listeners of Strange Familiars. A lot of you folks might be familiar with a series that in both comics and television called The Walking Dead. And we're not going to talk about that today, but there's a little-known graphic novel called Curse of the Wendigo that was illustrated by Charlie Adlard, who is responsible for the bulk of the artwork in the Walking Dead series. He popped on in number 7 and did the entire series up through the final issue of Walking Dead, 193. And this is a book that came out in 2011. So he was in the middle of his Walking Dead run when this came out. And I wasn't actually familiar with this until a couple of years ago when it popped up. It's published by Dynamite Entertainment, came out in 2011, and is a pretty small graphic novel that you can read in one sitting.
I liked it. I liked the art because I know Charlie Adler's art, so it was familiar to me, and I like it. I thought that the story had me from the beginning because it's set during World War I, and as somebody who's interested in history, I'm automatically connected to that sort of thing. I'm automatically intrigued. I also was interested in the fact that it was from the French perspective. Normally, when you get these things, they sort of automatically go to the American perspective. But this is trench warfare in the 19 teens, and it's somewhere in either France or somewhere along the line of demarcation between the German lines and the French lines. I think it's 3 years into the war when it takes place. And so right away, the sense I get, especially with Adler's art, is that this is a grueling, horrendous, misery-filled, one step away from death existence. There's a fine line of demarcation between the fear of receiving the bullet and the relief of receiving the bullet that ends your life.
And kind of to step back a little bit and give you the sort of the gist of what's going on in this book, there is a native soldier named Wahati of the Cree, and he has found himself overseas with the French military. And we find out that he has found his way there because he has been tracking and searching after this Wendigo spirit. And it seems to be running ragged through both sides of the skirmish. The French and the Germans are experiencing the results of this. And as a result, they sort of draw a temporary truce and decide to send several soldiers from each side with Wahati to find out what has been killing their soldiers in such a gruesome way and resolve that issue. So, Sam, I'd like to know from you, how historically accurate is this? Are there historical examples of raging cannibalistic Wendigos plaguing the soldiers in World War I?
So you're joking, maybe, but this is what I found compelling about the story, is that what's so different about a raging Wendigo and the reality of trench warfare? The way that it wreaks havoc upon the human body, people's minds. The idea of the metaphor of a Wendigo sort of standing in for war works for me, especially when you have something as bloody and gruesome, what at the time was the most destructive event in human history. And so that's kind of how it fits. It fits the metaphor and the feel and the atmosphere of a world war, where it's just, this is all about the destruction of the human body. And what major warfare and weaponry and artillery and a mustard gas is built to do is destroy the human body in ways that human beings had never, ever seen before. So, no, there's no sort of historical evidence of a Wendigo, and yet the reality of the destruction that it causes is on par with the destruction to the human body of what war does. And in fact, there is sort of a little joke in here along the way, because there's 3 French soldiers and I think 3 German soldiers who set out together, and they're like initially kind of really skeptical, as you might imagine. Like, and there's a couple of jokes like, do we just stop shooting each other now? And then after we do this, do we go back to shooting each other? We should do this over Christmas. And the joke there is actually they did. One Christmas, I think it was 1915, they actually stopped the war and everybody celebrated and did their Christmas things. And then as soon as Christmas was over, they went back to shooting each other.
Didn't they actually come together and have Christmas together at the same tables?
In the war zone.
That's unbelievable.
So that there's a reference to that here. Towards the back of the book, there's a story about a character, Chiraud, one of the French soldiers, who was court-martialed and ultimately executed because of this crazy story that he told, which seems to be the story of tracking the Wendigo. And that's in the historical record, this back bit here. I don't know if that comes from the historical record or what. It wouldn't surprise me to learn that there are stories told by soldiers during the war who saw things and experienced things that would be within the realm of the supernatural, largely because of the experience of the psychotrauma of being in a war, but also because maybe a situation like that actually calls for a transition into a paranormal supernatural experience.
Well, the other thing too is really neat hearing you say that. This is what that made me think of, is that a lot of times supernatural experiences happen to folks when they're in the midst of liminal spaces, or they're in the midst of like construction of houses where they're kind of going from one phase to another, and there's pretty much nothing more liminal than like the destruction of a war, because you're never the same before and after, whether on an individual level or a cultural level. And
the concept of liminality, like you're literally on a line.
Yeah.
Like you're on a line of demarcation. Like you cross that line, it means certain death. So you're living on the line between life and death every minute of the day.
And I should mention too, the writer himself is named Matthew Missoff, and I may have mispronounced his last name, but I didn't want to not mention the writer. But yeah, that last bit in here is certainly written as if it is a historical record, and seems seems like it actually happened.
So, well, I would like to talk a little bit about the Wendigo as a thing.
Yeah.
So, what do you know about the Wendigo? I know very little. I remember reading a little bit about a Wendigo, which shows up in an X-Men book.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think I read this and realized that I don't know enough about the folklore, as much about the folklore of the Wendigo as I thought. I had always pictured the Wendigo as almost like a Bigfoot-like creature. And almost as like a synonym for Bigfoot, sort of like Yeti and Sasquatch. But I'm realizing that it's much more of the spirit realm, and we could, now that I say that, I mean, Bigfoot itself may be of the spirit realm, so who knows? But yeah, I grew up reading about the Wendigo from Marvel Comics, and so even thinking about the Wendigo, that's the image that I get. The Wendigo was actually a man who was going through a ritual to become, in a sense, immortal as long as he began and continued to feed upon human flesh.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's interesting. I makes me want to kind of read up on the Wendigo a little more and see what other legends tell about the origin of the Wendigo and what the Wendigo is.
So I think that the flesh-eating concept here is something to dwell on for a moment, in that that's automatically seen as like an evil thing, sort of a taboo thing. And so the Wendigo character, now I can't speak for the legend itself and its origins and within the tradition that it comes from, but there is a kind of analog to the Wendigo in lots of different cultures, and that there's a creature out there who's like made of evil. And the idea is that like this creature does things that are inexorably bad. And a lot of these traditions have a kind of character like that within their lore as a means of kind of like, I guess, keeping your tribe or your community or your people kind of like aware of the fact that there are lines you can cross into the evil realm, which are forbidden, and like you can get there, you don't want to, and it's to keep people sort of keep them in line.
So what are some examples of those other traditions that you're referring to?
There are lots of these. I would say like lots. I'm thinking of like the X-Files sort of, and like how the X-Files kind of like traveled this territory where they talked about different cultures and how these things would come to life. And I'm thinking of like the Chupacabra, for example, which are like things that
the goat sucker.
Yeah, things that come from lore, which when manifest, would be seen as X-File type paranormal in paranormal territory, but are actually born of deep-seated tradition going back, hundreds, if not thousands of years.
So in the podcast realm here, we call those cryptids.
I learned a new word.
Cryptids.
So those cryptids are universal, I imagine. And they're the ones that are I would be familiar with were ones that come from like, Abrahamic religion, where you get like concepts of the kinds of the areas that you're not supposed to delve into, like black magic is, like I'm thinking specifically of contacting people from the other realm, of like witchcraft, which in the book of Samuel, for example, the King Saul is kind of, he's compelled to go to a witch, basically like a seer, or a medium, to kind of like to see the future, which you're not supposed to do. That's seen as like really bad. And so like crossing over into the other realm of the dead is seen as a place that you should sort of stay away from. And so like he's cursed and he's ultimately killed for this transgression. And there's, a lot of different like characters that show up throughout the Hebrew Bible who kind of like traverse that territory between life and death. You don't really learn about it in Sunday school.
Sure.
Because, it's too much fun.
I didn't learn much in Sunday school.
No, I imagine not. This native Cree guy finds his way across the Atlantic Ocean in the early 20th century to fight with the French, alongside the French in the First World War, which is like, that's weird.
Well, I don't know. I had assumed that he came along with the American soldiers, and there's actually a little footnote down here that says an estimate of more than 12,000 American Indians fought in the trenches during the First World War. At that time, the United States had not yet granted them citizenship. So here they are, being enlisted or drafted, probably more like, to fight in this war that wasn't their war, and they weren't even being considered as people at that point.
So there's no draft during the First World War, right? That comes later.
Okay.
So they were definitely enlisting, and there can be any number of reasons as to why. But yeah, clearly, like, and the character mentions that he's fighting for a country that doesn't even recognize his existence.
Yeah.
And it's not overtly political in that the story is all about like the struggle of the natives and how ultimately Europeans and the white man destroyed their way of life. That really isn't central to this story, but if you know it, and if you're aware of it, then like his presence here is sort of, I guess, it speaks for sort of a larger cause.
Yeah, it's an important backdrop, and for him, this character, being there as part of the war was really a means to an end for him. That was his. I read it as if that was his ticket across the ocean to capture this being he was tracking and seeking.
So, I mean, I don't know how much of this we give away, but like...
No spoilers.
No spoilers. Okay. Well, okay, good. Okay.
Yeah,
buy the book and find out.
Yeah, it ties up pretty nice, and there's some neat twists at the end, and which we're not going to give away. Curse of the Wendigo. I enjoyed it. I recommend it. It was a good read. What about you, Sam?
I did too. I actually wasn't expecting much, and it delivered in a way that was satisfying.
I picked it up originally because of Charlie Adler.
Yeah.
His artwork as a Walking Dead fan, it's hard to look at his illustrations and not think Walking Dead or have that same feel. And it's interesting because I don't know if it was his first comic, but where I first saw his artwork was in the 90s. He illustrated a whole bunch of the X-Files comics. So his kind of wheelhouse is definitely in the horror supernatural kind of realm of comics.
Yeah, a lot of these, if you're familiar with Walking Dead comics, a lot of these characters that we're looking at that are French and German soldiers kind of like are reminiscent of, like their faces are reminiscent of some of the people that we've come to know in the Walking Dead universe.
Yeah.
Like that looks like Eugene.
I kind of feel like Wahadi should have enlisted Negan to help him fight the Wendigo.
Well, I don't know. Can you beat a Wendigo with a barbed wire covered baseball bat?
I think you can beat anything with a barbed wire covered baseball bat.
Alrighty then.
Worth a try.
It's settled.
Okay. We'll leave it at that.
Okay.
All right. So the next thing on our reading pile here is a book called The Department of Truth, which is a pretty recent publication by Image Comics. And it's been coming out serialized in single issues. And I think it's around number 7 or 8 right now. And this is a collection of the first 5 issues in a book called Department of Truth, The End of the World. And this is written by kind of one of the...
How do you pronounce it? Tinian?
Tinian? I would say Tinian,
James
but...
Tinian.
He's tiny. James Tynion IV is the writer, and he has been sort of blown up in the comics world. He's been writing Batman. He's been writing a comic book called Something is Killing the Children. And the art duties on this issue are by a guy named Martin Simmons, which for me was a bit of an acquired taste. He has absolutely seems to have gone to the school of Bill Sienkiewicz and has a lot of sort of the 90s Bill Sienkiewicz feel to him.
Yeah, now that I'm looking at it and you mentioned that, that actually reminds me of that copy of The Shadow that we were looking at, the Sienkiewicz copy of The Shadow.
Yeah, totally. The page I'm looking at right now, which obviously the podcast listeners can't see, but he's got this penchant for the checkers. So the tablecloth in a diner scene is all checkerboard, but it's very uneven checkers, and the wall behind them is the same. And that's such a Sienkiewicz thing.
It's very flat. There's not a lot of like... it's not. It doesn't work sort of with depth or 3D things. It's very flat, and like the edges of things are kind of like not very well defined, which actually works for me for this particular comic, and we'll get into why. Okay, so let's be honest. At first blush, you're like, I don't like this art.
I don't, and I'm one of the rare like comic fans who, for me, Bill Sienkiewicz has always been hot or cold. I like him in small doses, and so for to see entire books by him is a little much for me, and I feel the same way with this guy. I've now read this book a couple times, and it's starting to grow on me, and it sort of does follow the feel of the narrative.
All right, so before we get into like how the art kind of fits the narrative, talk through what the premise is.
So it's funny because we just talked about the X-Files earlier, and so the premise of this book is very much like X-Files, where instead of investigating supernatural phenomena or monsters and things like that, like Scully and Mulder did, this is a government department that is built around investigating conspiracy theories. And so it's super timely. And there's some really cool twists in here, which we won't give away.
But what's paranormal about it?
Well, it's interesting. So this brings up so this settles around a character named Cole, who is an FBI agent who gets who his job is investigating conspiracy theories on the internet. So he spends way more time behind a desk than in the field. He's considered a FBI teacher for his part-time job and teaches other agents. But he gets enlisted by this group mainly because he is looking into conspiracy theories and spends time at a convention built around the Flat Earth Society. And to his surprise...
Which I'm a part of, by the way.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, there's tons of evidence out there. There's that.
I mean, look at the floor. It's flat.
It's totally flat. Like, am I like rolling off the end of the... No, I'm not. And there was that guy who got in a rocket recently, or a balloon or something. And...
I occasionally roll off the...
Well, that's because you're an inveterate alcoholic.
Yeah, there's that. So he ends up going to the end of the earth. And so this is wrapped around this idea of something called Tulpas, which I'm pretty sure we've mentioned on the podcast before, which sort of translates to thought form, and this idea that thought can manifest into reality if it's strong enough. And so this is looking at Tulpas on almost a cultural level. And so this department is trying to stop things like a conspiracy theory like the Flat Earth Society taking hold and enough people believing it that it actually becomes reality, and all time is retrofitted to that reality of the earth being flat. And so it's and that's only in the first issue, and kind of expands from there.
So let's just investigate that for a second, because there's, number one, it's interesting, and number two, this is sort of core, I think, to the concept of maybe strange familiars in general, right? Like, there are a lot of things that Tim investigates that are these stories that have become really, really popular. And I think one of the things that this comic book is trying to do is say, like, it's asking that sort of perennial question, like, what's true? Is something true because people believe it, or is there something beyond that? Like, there's just like simple scientific fact, and you can choose not to believe it, but you'd be wrong. And so, like, we joked about the flat earth thing earlier, but, like, the earth is round, the end. But if indeed this, based on this Tulpa theory, if enough people sort of invest belief and effort and research into the idea that something could be another way, does that begin to kind of butt up against or approach a certain kind of truth in and of itself?
Well, it's really neat, and I've never seen sort of this concept of put on like a cultural level like this and something like the flat earth. But I think even on the individual level, like, thought is super powerful. Oftentimes, even with like natural remedies and things, because I delve in that a lot, your belief in whether something will work has a huge impact on whether it does or not. And intention is really important. And what does that mean when you expand that out infinitely?
I once had an ingrown nail on my finger. Actually, this happened a bunch of times. And you concocted some wizardly poultice. It looked like mud. I know that there was like garlic in it and honey and a bunch of other stuff. You should list all the things, because it's a wonderful list of things.
Well, it's proprietary. No, I'm just kidding. For the listeners at home, like, I'm also a farmer and a forager, and I work a lot with herbalism and wild medicine and things like that.
So you're a wizard.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Wizards, they don't wear hats?
I forget. Is it wizards with a hat?
I think the sorcerers are just wizards without hats.
Yeah, I hope. Yeah, hopefully some of you will get that reference. But yeah, there is a huge component to all types of medicine and how you're feeling about it and whether you believe it will work. I mean, there are things like placebo effects, which are used in tests, but placebos, if they work, they work. And there's a long history of herbal medicine being very, very effective, and whether you are open to that type of remedy is going to impact how well they work.
So when when you put this concoction onto my finger, it swelled up to it was like twice the size of what it normally is.
Yeah, looked fantastic.
It was like green. It was bad. And, I don't know if you want to talk about what the ingredients were. They were like pretty standard. There wasn't anything fancy, as I recall.
No, I use, honey, which is an amazing antibacterial, antifungal. Charcoal, which is really good at drawing out. Plantain, not the banana type, but the herb that grows wild, plantago. And comfrey, which is a really strong healing herb. And that may have been it. It may have been one or two other things. A lot of times it's really just about what's in season or growing and that I can use fresh, or if I have dried supplies. But it's effective. They work.
Yeah, so you put this thing on my finger and you're like, all right, look. Like the only thing you need to do here is just like, as I put this on, say to yourself, this will work. And so you wrapped it in tape and you're like, it should feel hot. And so I don't know, did I choose to allow myself to believe that it felt hot, or did it feel hot? It doesn't matter is the point.
Right.
Then within 24 hours, my finger was all better.
Yeah, and realistically speaking, those are all effective herbs, so it would have likely have worked completely fine without your even knowing what it was or what it was for. But intention is a powerful thing. Was that in itself a type of thought form? I don't think so. Do you think that you can bring things to being by thinking it? Physical things?
Put that way, no. But I do believe, based on sort of some, personal reflection, investigation, therapy, and meditation that I've done over the last 12, 15 years of my life, that there are things that you can do mentally, emotionally, to heal your body physically. Like, for example, I have major anxiety and I've suffered from depression and stuff like that. And over time, what I've discovered is that, I can't think my way out of those things, but the certain physical manifestations of that I generally throughout my life just took as normal. Like my stomach would be out of control, full of all kinds of pain and gas and uncomfortable feelings. And what it was me kind of sublimating my stress and saying, I don't feel this. I shouldn't feel this. I don't feel this. But my body was like, yes, you do. And so it would therefore manifest it in its own way. And then until I began to open my mind up to the idea that could actually be a thing, nothing changed. And so, but there came a point where, now I haven't fixed it, but there's come a point where it's when I admit I'm in pain right now, or I'm feel discomfort right now, and it may be my stomach or another part of my body, there is something that happens where the sort of death grip, the vice grip that the pain has on me begins to release a little bit. And I think that comes from intentionality. I think that comes from practice. It comes from wearing new neuropathological grooves in your brain.
Sure.
To kind of change the way you do things and change unhealthy habits into more healthy ones. Anyway, how does this relate to Department of Truth? So the way it relates to Department of Truth in my mind is, can you talk a little bit more about what you mean when Cole reaches the end of the world?
He literally gets on an airplane with members of this group from the Flat Earth Society who say, we need to show you something. And he flies literally to the end of the earth. Thereby
there it is.
Thereby confirming is a wonderful 2-page spread, which is done in a crazy Martin Simmons-esque painterly style.
You're a big fan of 2-page spreads.
Oh, I love a 2-page spread.
What do you like about a 2-page spread?
Man, you're reading and you're down here in the details, and you're going panel by panel, and then you turn the page and it just blows up into this massive display.
So describe what you're seeing.
So what I see now is white Arctic mess and what appears to be other planets in the distance. Although this is like a map of the world on a round circle as opposed to a sphere, and the plane is flying into this abyss. And so we're led to believe that what he is seeing here is the literal end of the world, as if the world was actually flat, and he's seeing visual confirmation of it right now. And the next words out of his mouth are, "Oh, Jesus." So he's kind of blown away by that.
Is he at the end of, what's the conceit here? Is he at the end of the world, or what's happening? What's your theory?
Well, so he's on this plane and he sleeps for a little bit. And when he comes to, he's a little stumbly. He feels sick. He pukes. and then he's seeing this stuff. I actually think he's been drugged and he's hallucinating. He's acting like someone who's been drugged. But at the end of this scene, he gets, without going into too much detail, he gets absconded away from this group into the grips of the government agency that we come to learn is the Department of Truth. And we learn why he was chosen and why he is the perfect individual. He's sort of becoming our Agent Mulder of the series. He's an interesting guy.
Is he as attractive as Fox Mulder is?
David Duchovny? Hell no.
Nobody is.
No, you can't touch that. All right, so
here's what I like about the book, and we're gonna sort of inch up against a spoiler which we will not divulge. One of the things that frames the book in a way is the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Yep, that's our page one intro to what's happening here.
Which, for many people, myself included, remains one of those things where it's like there is undeniably a government conspiracy surrounding this event. We will never know the truth about it, and there's that sort of like nagging mystery. And I mean, people for decades have attempted to like draw out the definite and incontrovertible truth about the JFK assassination. And obviously, like, there are different sides of the coin, and people have gone off the deep end on this, and people have written books, and Oliver Stone has made movies, which is a great movie, by the way, just in and of itself. It's just a wonderful film to watch, even if it may be all garbage. And people have like gone to sort of battle of words over this, and maybe even fists, I don't know, about what actually happened. Whether the government narrative about a one gunman shooting of President Kennedy in Dallas in November 1963 is actually a viable truth or not. And people have twisted themselves into knots trying to determine what actually happened there. And that in and of itself becomes like its own sort of supernatural kind of investigation. Something that, of course, many of us have become obsessed with, myself included. And so when it starts there, I'm automatically pulled in because I'm like, this is something that no matter what, you parachute me in, you say JFK assassination, I'm there. Now I've changed my views on like what I think of John F. Kennedy as a president, and why he would have been assassinated, and we again, this is not a JFK assassination podcast. It remains one of those major historical mysteries that really compel people. So I'm pulled in right away. And like when it comes to like picking sides and flat earth societies, there are certainly groups of people who believe that there is a major, or was a major, conspiracy at play here, like indeed in the actual event, and then covering up the event. So it begins with one of the biggest and most and thorniest American political mysteries. If enough people like, and this is kind of at the conceit of the book, if enough people believe a certain thing is true about the assassination, does that then become the accepted reality of what happened?
And that certainly seems to be what they're fighting against in this series.
Yes.
What is the relationship between the belief of the masses and reality? And if that is happening, where is the need for intervention for the government in this case to step in and try to change it?
Yeah, and what is the government's what is the motivation of the government?
Yeah, what is their agenda?
What's their agenda, right? Because like when you think about JFK and you think about it from like a truly deeply like deep state kind of conspiracy perspective, you're like, well, the government is always out to get us, the masses, right? They're always out to like pull the wool over our eyes. And pull off assassinations and do things that are good for them, and like the the power elite and the cabal, whatever. If the government isn't completely an agent of evil, what then is their agenda in all of this, and what are they there to do? And I think that the first 5 issues of this book actually make a good case for what exactly the government is doing in these situations, what they're trying to maintain, and what kind of balance they're trying to maintain. And there's like, merit to that. Like, I think that there's like, that's first of all an interesting storyline, and secondly, like, gives you a different perspective on the whole concept of government conspiracy to begin with. Like, what's their agenda? Like, what are they trying to do for the world as a whole?
I think that this actually bears multiple readings. So I've read this a couple times now, and I've gotten a little bit more out of it each time, and it's a lot to think about. And I'm really fascinated to see where this is going.
Yeah, it's gotten pretty crazy in issues 6 and 7, kind of depart from where the first 5 issues went, and issue 7 was actually my favorite one of all.
Yeah, we're definitely worth checking out. So we're definitely trying to keep these in stock and supporting and promoting this series. It's excellent.
Is there sort of like a TV show or something in the offing here?
Oh yeah, there's been rumors of that it's been optioned to become a show or a movie. I'm not sure what the current state of that is, but
So by way of transition, I have a question for you.
yes.
When I say the name Alan Moore, what comes to mind?
Wow. Well, it's funny. I'm also among the maybe not minority with Alan Moore of comics fans who, for me, Alan Moore is also kind of hit and miss. Obviously, Watchmen is the first thing that comes to mind, which is a masterpiece, one of my favorite pieces of comics work ever. He's a grumpy old man, and reading interviews with him is kind of fascinating. But yeah, Watchmen and his Swamp Thing run for me are the epitome of his work. So fantastic. And
What do you like about him and those works specifically?
well, for me, like as a kid growing up, my introduction to Swamp Thing was some of the early issues, and then also the really bad yet really wonderful movie that came out, I guess early '80s. Worst special effects ever. It was worth watching if you haven't seen it. And the thing I loved about Watchmen was it's so dense and there's so much in there, and it really is one of the best graphic novels ever written. Which makes it odd that From Hell, which is what we're going to be talking about next, his big massive tome, it's like 572 pages. I've actually tried to read it a couple times and I have yet to get through it.
How was it hitting the table?
It's big and heavy, and actually the new hardcover edition, which we have right here, which we were reading, is beautiful. I love it's such a beautiful copy.
Agreed.
You got through the whole thing and loved it.
Yep.
And I want to hear about that. I haven't given up on it yet, but I need to sit down and like take it in little chunks and really kind of digest each issue, I think.
Speaking of little chunks,
Yeah.
it's about a serial killer who takes parts off of people.
Sometimes big chunks.
Sometimes big chunks, and you're most likely familiar with a serial killer, known in kind of the world of historical lore as Jack the Ripper. That's the general premise, although it's about much more than that.
Well, and the title From Hell apparently comes from a letter that is believed to be actually written by the real Jack the Ripper.
Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell, who's his partner on this one, did all the research that you need to do about Jack the Ripper. I don't know if you saw, but there's extensive footnotes at the end, pages and pages of footnotes at the end on each panel, and sort of the historical either accuracy or poetic license that they took, dramatic license that they took in changing things, and reference to several different books, some of which are a little bit more credible than others, that recall or try to piece together the story of who the Jack the Ripper was, because there's really no definitive story here. And this is actually From Hell in and of itself is a theory about who he was. I mean, there's approaches towards the truth. But this is one of them, that it delves deeply into historical record and, personal interviews and police records in a way that reminds one of historical novels and that kind of thing, which I think is done extensively well. It's done really, really well and extensively.
I'm pretty lukewarm when it comes to period pieces generally. And, Victorian England, I would say, is not my wheelhouse of knowledge or general interest. So I had a little hard time getting sucked into it.
So that's interesting, because I don't consider Victorian England to be my wheelhouse either. It does tend to leave me a little bit cold. In general, it's got a stigma about it. And I much prefer like medieval history, ancient history. Like if you set something in like Rome or like Greece or, Bithynia, Pergamum or Antioch.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I'm right there,
Well, I like frying things in Greece.
There you go. So I'm going to let that one sit there. Like a thing in your stomach, which is really greasy, just sits there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Long
it does.
term.
So now you've talked a little bit about Alan Moore, and you've talked a little bit about what you like about Alan Moore. This is just a random page. What do you see here?
I see horse-drawn carriages.
Uh-huh.
Well, I see Eddie Campbell doing his Eddie Campbell thing, and he's kind of moving you through the panels with his very scratchy kind of style.
So what's amazing to me about this is that, first of all, when you say like scratchy, this is black and white.
Yeah, we got some black and white artwork. And I love black and white artwork. I don't have any issues with that.
Yeah, this is line art and scratchy and shadowy and silhouette-y. And some of it is impressionistic in that way. But then there are moments that are like really vivid and up in your face, like the characters who are these scraggly, beaten down, very often very poor street people. This is a story largely about prostitutes and drunks in England who are living like, mouthful to mouthful. Their lives are really, really deeply struck through with poverty. And so like you see that in their faces. You see like the wrinkles, and you see the pain, and you see the wear and tear on the body, and like human intimacy, where there's a lot of that here. And there's a picture right there of the human body in repose, and it's like not sexy at all. It's really
he's definitely got
gritty.
a grittiness to the characters, which I think fits the story and the time and the.
So the story is ultimately about William Gull, who is member of the upper class. I mean, it's a bit convoluted, but he kind of gets, as the history goes, he kind of gets like entwined in this attempt to I guess cover up a royal sex scandal, and he's kind of like contracted by ultimately the Queen to make sure that these women who are going to speak out against the Prince Albert, I think there's a relationship and an offspring because of it, and the idea is that these women are going to like finally speak out against him and say, that they're these trod upon, forgotten members of society, and they're going to blackmail him so that they can like make themselves some money and get out of the trenches. I guess William Gull is kind of contracted because he's a doctor and he works in the hospital where he takes care of mental patients, and so he's sort of contracted to kind of like get rid of them. But he doesn't get rid of them in any kind of like conventional way. Here's where the sort of the paranormal comes in a bit. Like he's a Freemason. He takes this shit very, very seriously. And there's like a whole otherworldly realm of gods and goddesses and all kinds of lore that goes back many centuries that he is steeped in. And it kind of like brings to the fore as he ultimately like mutilates women, kills them and mutilates them, all like offerings to these gods and these divine figures that he's supposedly trying to appease. And it's this aspect of the story that steps away from like the everyday, and the way that Alan Moore kind of addresses these things in the story is that there are moments of departure from the norm, William Gull departs from his body, goes into different eras of time, different kind of levels of consciousness. And there's like a whole sort of ethereal aspect to this, which I think like gives you a sense that this whole Jack the Ripper story has a lot more to do with like the ills of society and the tendency for people to kind of like cling to things that are like the Wendigo in a way, that are like to explain evil, that go beyond just like the mundane everyday, like here's an angry person who murdered someone. Like there has to be something else going on. There's got to be another kind of realm of evil that is controlling people's actions, because normal people wouldn't behave this way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can see that in this. And the whole idea of this being a cover-up for an illegitimate baby is like a big conspiracy theory in itself, right? Like they don't know that that's actually true, right?
Right. So there is a great deal of circumstantial evidence.
Yeah. Where else is this sort of? You talked to me a little bit about the anachronisms that are popping up. Like,
oh yeah,
there's
so
some weird panels in here I've seen where we leave Victorian England and all of a sudden there's a TV in the background.
Right. So there's this moment here. It's chapter 7 on page 24, pretty famous moment, where William Gull is kind of skulking through these alleyways, but it's like this really downtrodden, poor slum area where he kind of finds his victims. And he's sort of skulking through the alleys, and he winds up in someone's window, and you first get the perspective of the person in the window with like a sagging light bulb from William Gull's perspective, and then it switches. But in between it switching, you see that behind this person's head is a television. And actually, Alan Moore explains to you what's on the TV, and we can talk about that. But like, it's clear that like by the wallpaper and the fact that there's a TV in here,
there's a Marilyn Monroe poster,
and a Marilyn Monroe poster on the wall, that this is not the 1880s or 1890s, that we've been transported into the 1960s, and it just comes out of nowhere.
And is this explained at all through
No.
It's just there.
It's just there.
So why do you think it's there? Why do you think he put that in there?
So he explains why he does it, but like when I was reading through this, I hadn't read the explanation yet, and I was like startled by it. It happens a couple more times throughout, in ways that are a little bit more explored. Here it comes as just 2 panels, and then for me the craziest part is like, so the 7th and 8th panel of the page have this character who's like in his bathrobe, looking kind of shocked, and behind him a close up of the TV, and then it switches, and you see this man looking through the window at William Gull, who's got like a startled, ghostly look on his face, like he doesn't know what he's seeing either. And so the moment here is, for me, like William Gull has been transported into another time frame. The liminality of this is being messed with. Mm-hmm. And like his actions are so beyond the realm of the norm. So like they're otherworldly. One of the ways in which Alan Moore is trying to explore this is to say, like, there are these weird moments where like he's transported in time, and there's no explanation for it other than like it adds to the mystery of the whole thing.
Yeah, it almost looks like he's not looking in the window, but that he is the reflection of the person looking out.
Right.
And he's seeing himself through time.
Yeah, and this happens again later on in chapter 10, where he's suddenly where he's actually mutilating a body in someone's home in the 1880s, and then he's transported to a modern day meaning like 1970s office, where you see like computers and 80s, I guess, computers and typewriters, and it's like a modern looking 1980s sort of office with people in 80s looking dress, what would be modern day Alan Moore at the time. And William Gull is like looking around, he's sort of surprised by what he's seeing, and they're looking at him in his like blood-soaked clothing, but nobody seems all that much bothered by it. And again, it's this like weird, liminal shift where like the act that he's partaking in somehow is so gruesome that it shifts the time frame that he's in and shifts like the whole time space continuum.
That's so neat. It's pretty compelling.
It happens one more time where he winds up outside a big building which would never have existed in the 1880s, and I don't know, that happens a little bit later on, and you see this building behind him. And of course the other part of this which is so fascinating is the geography of London, which they did a tremendous amount of research on to because it really plays into this, like where these murders took place, and where William Gull was, and what streets he took, and where he did his deeds and things like that. And so there's this big building which exists now in London but didn't in the 1880s, which just appears behind him as he's like tearing through the innards of this woman.
That's a fascinating way to kind of put across that, like the sheer horror of what's happening.
Yeah.
It's compelling. It makes me want to finally dive back in and finish reading.
You should read it. I thought too it was going to be a slog, and it was for the first bit, but then I was like hooked.
Yeah, it's a classic comic piece. It's a classic piece of comic art and work that I feel sort of ashamed that I haven't read yet.
You should be ashamed.
I'm ashamed of myself.
You should be ashamed. And this is us now, the entire Strange Familiars universe, shaming you into reading From Hell.
All right, I'm gonna get on it.
So I'm just going to read this because it's directly related to what we were talking about before. It's one of the notes in the back on that scene where he pulls back the curtain, and there's a TV and electric lights. The scene is based upon an interpretation of a ghost story recounted in Jack the Ripper: 100 Years of Mystery by Peter Underwood, which was published by Blandford Press in 1987, amongst other places. The story, as related by Mr. Chapman, is that On at least 4 separate occasions, spread over a number of years, he pulled back his curtain to witness a man and a woman disappearing along the passageway of number 29 Hanbury Street. According to Mr. Chapman, it was always the same pair performing exactly the same actions, and the woman looking rather old and bent, as the man, dressed in heavy topcoat and tall hat, like William Gull, helped her along the passageway toward the backyard. These apparitions would, it seems, usually occur in the very early hours of morning during the autumn months. In the interpretations of the event, I have chosen to have Gull's aura phrase hallucinations show him in a vision of Mr. Chapman looking back at him from the future, thus suggesting possibilities beyond those of the conventional ghost story and more in keeping with the themes of From Hell. And so I'd like to ask you, this actually helps me get to my question, which was, we've talked about 3 different books now.
Uh-huh.
What is, would you say, the common theme running through all of them? What would be the theme of this episode of Strange Familiars?
I mean, in some ways, the common theme is, like, what is the nature of reality? How do our actions on Earth impact the beyond and vice versa?
So what's beyond?
We don't know.
What do you think's beyond? What have you seen in your life which gives you a clue?
I don't think anyone knows. And I don't think we know. And my personal feelings on the matter are that physical reality as we know it is one aspect of the whole. I don't think we know what is beyond, but I do think that there's a lot more than we know. And everything I've learned about ecology through my work and the things that I teach and what I've experienced tell me that we've only got a tiny part of the picture. One aspect of design that I do with ecological design, when I'm designing landscapes, when I'm designing other systems, is all about design by exclusion. So when we look at limitations, we can actually cross things off the list. And we finally get ourselves down to, like, what is an actual design that works? And so I think that we almost understand reality based on exclusion. So everything that we know points to things that we can identify and explain and understand, but it also creates this, like, edge of what's beyond that we just don't know yet. And as we go through time, sometimes that edge expands a little bit. You know, a lot of the talk on this podcast revolves around things, various cryptids, and are they physical flesh, or are they the spirit, or are they other things? And so it's impossible for everything to be explained through our understandings of science and ecology. And that there are things that we know based on history that people experience, and we can't explain it. We just don't know. And that's part of the beauty in it, I think.
Do you think it's something that you will come to understand when you die? Is that when the truth is revealed, or?
Well, as a living being creature in front of you, I clearly have no frame of reference to answer that question. I don't know. I would love it if that were the case, but
You would love it if that were the case.
I would love to, yeah. I would love to die, and all of a sudden it's like the curtain of Oz is being pulled aside, and all of a sudden I'm exposed to much more.
I think a lot of people believe in various different shades of it, that's what happens. I mean, there's certainly a huge component of religious belief, doesn't matter what it is, Abrahamic or otherwise, that is to say Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise, that has that expectation that there's this great apocalypse, which literally means, reveal of the truth at some point, whether it's the end of the world or the end of your life, that as you said, the curtain will be pulled back, and, like, all those mysteries, like who shot JFK, for example, will be revealed.
Yeah, well, I hope that's the case, and I hope I find out, and I hope it doesn't happen for a very long time.
You had questions for me?
Yeah, what is your I've been on this podcast before, and I've read a lot of these books, and I've gone out on Bigfoot hunts and these things, and it's something I take a lot of joy in, but what would you say your relationship to the supernatural is?
Not as intimate, in that I haven't had the same kinds of experiences that you have, although I've heard you talk about them and they feel very real and compelling. And what's weird about this is that when we talked about doing this episode, I thought, I know that I've had personal experiences with the quote unquote supernatural, but I can't remember them. And at the time, I remember thinking to myself, what I do remember is having the experience and saying, like, this was monumental. this was life changing, or this was really compelling, and for whatever reason, I need to remember this, and then it just fades. And I mean, what's there is ghostly, and I mean that in two ways. One, in that it's like hard to, it's intangible and it's hard to grasp. But it's also to do with ghosts. Like I feel like I've had experiences with non-corporeal beings in various settings where I just felt a presence or experienced an activity that could not have happened otherwise.
And do you feel like these were in your youth or later in life?
No, they've happened throughout my entire life. But the phenomenon is, and you actually said that that's sort of common, that a thing would happen and you would like sort of it would be forgotten, like it fades.
Yeah, I think that's happened with me too. I do feel like I've heard stories of people who have these amazing experiences and they act very nonchalant toward them as if nothing's happening, or in the aftermath they do sort of fade. Things feel very intense in the moment, and then afterwards almost like your cultural training kicks in and you try to explain it away as other things. But
yeah, it reminds me of like the end of It, Stephen King's It. We're going to spoil this one, so if you haven't read that book, where have you been for the last 40 years? But at the end of the book, the main characters who experience this incredibly traumatic, very volatile, crazy, wild adventure all forget that it happened. And so like by the end, they're just kind of like whispers of events that they're sharing with each other. And they're like, do you remember? And they don't even really understand their own connection to each other. And then they lose connection to one another. They come back at the end as adults because it happened when they were children, but then they begin to forget again. And like, I feel like that he's like Stephen King often does, is that he's pulling on threads of something that's really universal. That there's this phenomenon that like a thing like that happens, and then it just, the natural order of things is that it fades.
Well, that seems like a good segue for us to fade out of this podcast.
I was wondering how you're going to do that.
So where can you find us? Hopefully we'll be back again. And but all of the books that we mentioned tonight, we do have in stock on our website, riverbendcomics.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And we do we have these in stock, and if you know they get pinched up and by the time you get there they're gone, shoot us a message. We can always do special orders. We also can be found on eBay in our eBay store, Riverbend-Comics, and hopefully there's some crossover between the Strange Familiars crew and the comic book world. I definitely live in that crossover. Thanks for listening. Any closing thoughts there, Sam?
I would like to thank Tim Renner for giving us this opportunity to share some of our, our obsessions with comic books. It's one that you've been trafficking for most of your life. I'm relatively new to it. So all these discoveries are very much that for me. They're like discoveries. Like From Hell has existed for a long time. It's been out there for 25 years, but I didn't know about it until I started to become a comic book person, and it's really changed my whole perspective on reading and experiencing art.
Yeah, it's been a lifelong love for me, and I'm still enjoying finding new things and revisiting old ones. So cool. Well, we both wish Tim a super fast recovery, and it's been nice to see him improving.
Thank you, Strange Familiars crew, for allowing us to get in your ear for a little while. Talk about comic books, which is what we know about. Did we do some ad or something now?
An ad?
Yeah.
For?
Hot sauce? Or tires? Or riverbendcomics.com.
Well, we did that already.
Oh, we did that already. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook and all that. Said that?
I said that.
Okay. I guess we should stop talking. Testing. You're a nice guy, and I like you when you're wearing a Mets hat.
Thank you. My name is Mookie Blaylock, and I am here to...
Do you know who Mookie Blaylock was?
He did not play for the Mets.
No, he was a basketball player. The Oklahoma Sooners.
Yeah, wasn't he number 10?
He might have been.
And then that's why Pearl Jam named their album 10, because Eddie Vedder was a huge Mookie Blaylock fan.
Are you serious?
I'm 100% serious about that.
I have no idea.
Fact check it, but I'm not making that up.
I think he played in the NBA for the Atlanta Hawks, but I'm not really sure.
I've never heard of the Hawks, but that seems logical.
You've never heard of the Hawks?
I don't know my basketball teams. I've heard of the Bulls and the Bears aren't basketball. I've heard of the Bulls, and I've heard of the Sixers.
Mm-hmm. And where are the Bulls from?
Chicago.
And the Sixers?
Are they from Philly?
Right. And do you know the whole name of the Sixers?
The Philadelphia 76ers.
Okay. And why are they called the 76ers?
Because of the 1776 took place in Philadelphia with the Liberty Bell, and Ben Franklin was there, and they had a party, and they said, let's make this country independent.
I want to thank Jon and Sam for doing that. That gives me a break, and hopefully we'll get some other guest hosts, maybe not every week. We'll try to do every other week until I get back on my feet a little bit more. I am on my feet, but we have some other thank yous here. These are people who made donations. Michael M. from Germany. The New Beatmaker from the United Kingdom. Jacob T. from New York. Eric C. again, he's a continual donator. He was on the thank you list last time and this time, so thank you so much, Eric. April C. from Colorado, thank you so much, April. She sent a wonderful book. Amy K. from Minnesota, thank you so much, Amy. Becky H. and family from the United Kingdom, thank you, Becky. They sent some coffee and some candy. Thank you so much. There was an anonymous Where Did the Road Go listener who sent cash and a silver coin and a wonderful note,
but didn't sign it.
Didn't sign it and no return address. I don't know whether this person wanted to remain anonymous or if they just forgot to sign their name. Thank you, whoever you are. Thank you so much. That was wonderful to receive that. And Steve K. from Florida. So thank you all so much for your support. And also I want to thank our patrons. Thank you so much, patrons. Without you guys, we couldn't do Strange Familiars. If you want to help us make Strange Familiars and get extra content besides, you can become a patron. Go to Patreon, patreon.com/strangefamiliars. There's all different tiers of support there. You can get extra content, or you can get things like t-shirts, stickers, pins, and more. Go ahead and check it out. Patreon.com/strangefamiliars. Speaking of Patreon, there will be an April patron episode. We were wondering if we could get one done.
Basically, because of the help from Jon, you were able to very slowly over the course of the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, if Jon and Sam hadn't stepped in, I wouldn't have been able to get that done for April. It's a 2-part episode, so it's going to be April's patron show and May's patron show. Starts in April, at the end of April, and continues in early May. So I was glad to be able to get that done, like I said, this month, more than any other, after the support that our patrons and everyone else showed us.
There's also still more people that I need to compile into a list of thank yous, and so what we've said so far is not exhaustive.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. There will be more.
And I'm sure there's someone really important to us that we've totally forgotten.
And my bed drawings, I'm going to stop at, I think, 20 or so, and we will publish a little digest-sized publication so people can buy those, and I'm going to auction off the originals. We'll figure out how to do that. We might do a live auction if I can figure out how to do it. Kind of a Strange Familiars live event. We auction the artwork and maybe have a group chat if people want to ask us questions or
would this be like
else.
an appearing like on camera thing?
I'll do it without you.
You know, this only works because I don't actually believe anyone's out there.
So, the patron show for April and May is based off a stereo view. Lo and behold, the photo of the week this week is a stereo view. Not the same one.
No.
But it is a stereo view. Writing, Spider, and Web.
I love the early scientific photography. You know, this isn't super early, but certainly turn of the century, and the clarity and the way that the subject, the spider, is positioned in the photo, I think is just amazing. It really is. Just the simplicity of black and white with a spider is...
Yeah, it's a beautiful orb and this nice spider in the center of it. Has a whole description on the back. Writing, Spider, and Web. Mrs. Spider is waiting for her dinner. A fat fly may get caught in her web. A hard shake or jar tells her that her dinner has come. When an insect gets caught, the spider rushes to it. She wraps the insect in a band of silk. She does this by turning the insect over and over while she spins. Then she takes her catch to the center of the web. She sucks the insect's blood and throws away the hard parts of its body. If an insect breaks her web, Mrs. Spider spins a new one. Under her body at the tip are 3 pairs of little knobs. They are called spinnerets. Some of the spinnerets make a thread covered with glue. Can you see the tiny glue drops? Mrs. Spider can also make thread without glue. The threads that go out from the center have no glue in them. The threads that go around and round have glue in them. The spider knows just which threads to walk on. She will not get her feet caught. The spider lays about 500 eggs. She puts them safely in a little silken egg sac. In spring, only a few young spiders come out. What do you think these spiders have done? They have eaten all their brothers and sisters. A little nature lesson on the back of the stereo view. So if you go to the show notes under this episode, you will see an image of this stereo view. If you click on that, it'll take you to our Etsy shop where you can buy this or other photos of the week. There's still some other photos of the week left in there. While you're on Etsy, you can check out our other stuff. Should get restocks of all of my books, I think, this week. I know there's a few people who are still waiting on book orders on Etsy. All books should be in stock this week. The manufacturer shipping them to us is like, they'll ship us 3 books in one box and then 7 books in another. It's just bizarre. It's been really, really messed up ever since COVID, but we should have them all in stock this week. If you've been waiting for your Etsy orders, we'll get them out this week. I think only 3 people are waiting for books at this point. If you go to our Etsy shop, you can see all kinds of stuff. We just added some new wooden magnets with some phrases from Strange Familiars. You're the wizard, do the chant, woo, and live, laugh, whoop. I don't even remember which episodes I said those phrases in, but I remember they were sort of catchphrases that listeners seemed to like and found kind of funny. And we will be adding some Bigfoot thank you cards as well. So check out all the stuff we have on Etsy. We'll be restocking t-shirts sometime soon. I have the order in. All kinds of stuff in our Etsy shop. And of course, that's big help for us as well when you buy stuff from Etsy. While you're on Etsy, make sure to check out our friends at Karmic Garden. They have the Strange Familiar scent. They have a Flannel Man scent. They have all kinds of other wonderful soaps and scented sanitizers, natural cleaners, candles, beard balm, and more. That's Karmic Garden. One word, I believe, on Etsy, but if you type in Strange Familiars, I think their stuff comes up as well as our stuff because they have that Strange Familiar scent. Also on Etsy, Chad has his Ruck Rabbit Outdoors shop. Check that out as well. Their stock changes pretty frequently. I think they have wool clothes and ferro rods and knives and so forth. So go ahead and check that out. Ruck Rabbit Outdoors. Make sure to check out Riverbend Comics, riverbendcomics.com. Thanks again to Jon and Sam for stepping in and hosting tonight. Patrons, you will get a show very soon for April. Everyone else, we will be back next week with another episode of Strange Familiars. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Holler Arts, music, books, art, podcasts, and more. If you like the intro and background music we use, that is by Stone Breath. To hear more or to purchase music by Stone Breath, you can go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com. Strange Familiars is on Facebook, facebook.com/strangefamiliars, where you can join the Strange Familiars Gathering group. We're on Instagram @strangefamiliars, and of course, you can always find us at strangefamiliars.com.
shake the towers to the ground, and shake the keys, and shake the chains, and answer lightning and answer rain.